Hi, I'm Andy Quiat. We've heard about a lot of really positive and uplifting things for most of today, but we are faced with active, organized, and well-funded opposition. I think everyone here is aware that Donald Trump is under indictment and being prosecuted in the state of Georgia in a RICO case. We're going to hear throughout the whole country a lot more about RICO over the next 6 to 12 months. I'm going to speak with you this afternoon about RICO in the context of democracy and climate and RICO. First, briefly about myself. As a child, I had a severe speech impediment. I have spent the last 50 years in boardrooms and courtrooms. The companies have been public, private, for-profit, nonprofit. The courts have been state courts, federal courts, multiple states, multiple federal districts, and multiple federal circuit courts of appeal. We're here to talk about RICO because we have a statute that can only be present and used in a democracy or a democratic republic. That's because even today, the rule of law pretty well prevails throughout our justice system. So that's the connectivity to democracy and the need to defend it. Now, RICO is just another tool in the toolbox. It is a blunt force animal. I'm going to lay out for you the primary components of a RICO case. You know, my wife would always say when I'd go off so often to go to a boardroom or a courtroom, she'd say, "Oh, you're going out to make more new friends today." When you bring a RICO case, you make a lot of friends. Someone who's the subject of a RICO case knows they've got a major problem on their hands. RICO is an acronym. It stands for the Racketeering, Influenced, and Corrupt Organizations Act, passed a little over 50 years ago, not all that apart in time from the passage of the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act. Many people think it's aimed at just racketeers. In fact, it's far, far broader than that. Now, what is a racketeer, and what can you do with this, and why climate? We are surrounded by what I call climate racketeers. They know the science, they know the costs they transfer, they know the costs they foist upon us, and they harm others. When I was a Ford Foundation environmental intern in the 70s, we didn't have some of these tools in the way we have them now. With RICO, we have climate racketeers who are economically benefiting from continuing their enterprise, an important word you're going to learn more about, and their activities by slowing down the scale and speed at which the climate catastrophe is being addressed. The remedies of the racketeering law enables us to wage war on fossil fuels with the impact needed for the times if successful. Different times call for different tools. RICO is a federal statute, but every state has a similar statute, and they vary in minor respects from one state to another. They provide both civil and criminal components, and different people get to use different components in different ways. On the criminal side, of course, there's jail. There's also the ability to dismantle enterprises and prohibit the participants from ever engaging in such activities again, directly or indirectly, and even from forming new organizations. On the civil side, you have the same level of relief, but it differs on the federal side on who can use it In Colorado, in the state statute, that same relief can be pursued in a private action. And that's equivalent to a form of injunctive relief. So I think racketeering laws are stronger than antitrust laws. You need to understand a few definitions. Racketeering activity means any act or threat that involves a series of what we call predicate acts. There's a long list, a couple pages in the federal statute. Murder, arson, robbery, interstate trafficking in people, slavery, all kinds of things. My favorite is mail fraud and wire fraud. And that's the nexus we so often use. And if you commit these acts in connection with an enterprise, you're going to be in potential difficulty. An enterprise is any individual, including an unassociated grouping of people who are not in a legal entity, partnership, corporation, trust, anything like that. If people in an enterprise commit a pattern of racketeering activity, that's actionable. Now, what's it take to have a pattern? To have a pattern, you need to have 2 acts of prohibited conduct federally within a 10-year period. I love wire fraud. It includes emails, text messages, phone calls. I love mail fraud. Mail fraud includes not only the U.S. mails and how they're used, but it also includes the use of things like private couriers like FedEx and UPS. And if these things are used in connection with any kind of a fraudulent scheme, we're off to the races. The civil remedies on the civil side include treble damages. Now, the damages under these statutes normally will be predicated upon damage to a person's, any person, property interests or business. That's a limitation, but that's what we live with. That being said, most lawyers, in my experience, have limited understanding of the law of damages and how to employ it to multiply and compound the damages at issue in a matter. I haven't found that to be a particular restriction in cases, the business or property issue. You also, in addition to treble damages, recover all the attorney's fees and expert witness fees involved. So the key to this is there must be a fraud of some kind, misrepresentations or concealment. So, you know, when we have a target, that's someone we're going to go after, the key that we should be looking for is someone who knows the science and has buried the science and continues to make profit by not dealing with these realities. Always in these cases, you run into also additional claims for things like a conspiracy to defraud or a conspiracy to engage in a racketeering enterprise. And what's interesting about conspiracies is that anyone and everyone associated with it is always liable for the acts of everyone else in the conspiracy, for the whole thing, from beginning to end. Now, they can stop midway through if the light goes off, and they publicly announce they've stopped and they're withdrawing and they disavow it. They can cut off their liability up at that point, but they're still liable up to that point. As for those who don't have that kind of sense, they are liable for the whole thing, and this gets into the continuation of a pattern of conduct that hinders, delays, or defrauds multiple creditors. A plaintiff, the people who bring a suit, are considered under fraudulent conveyance statutes to be future creditors and have standing. The biggest problems in a RICO case are whether you have standing and whether you can show proximate cause. Standing is not nearly the problem it used to be. It is on shifting ground. The case with Juliana versus the United States, and then the Children's Trust, and the recent success those folks have had in the Montana Supreme Court, standing is getting easier and easier. It takes a lot of work on the front end with great particularity at every step to demonstrate the fact patterns you need to have standing. To show that you've been harmed, proximate cause. How do I show that I've been harmed, or a group of people have been harmed by, in this instance, perhaps oil companies? We first had to do that when I was a Ford Foundation intern, and we wanted to shut down a catalytic cracking unit in Commerce City, Colorado. And we got enough attention from the then King Resources that owned the unit at that point that they said, we'll do whatever you want to avoid shutting it down in the next 24 hours. To prove proximate cause, you need good expert witnesses, and they're around. You need someone like a toxicologist, like Tom Kurt up in Aspen. He's an MD and a world-class toxicologist. You may need public certified hygienists. You may need an economist. You may need an actuary. This is all part of just assembling and building a case. You have other requirements that you have to show. Because of time, I'm really just sort of skimming the surface. Happy to talk to anyone about it in more detail. You have to show a pattern of racketeering activity. The courts have imposed on top of the statutes a bunch of other requirements. One of them being that the pattern, in addition to those 2 acts over 10 years, you also have to show that the pattern is either a closed loop of activity in a set time or is a continuing pattern for a given period of time that is up to each judge, more or less, and a number of other requirements, but it takes organization and it is complex litigation. But you reach a point where once you survive a motion or two to dismiss, a motion for summary judgment, you end up often engaged in settlement discussions. And that's one way to get to a constructive solution to these issues once someone really knows that they're going to have to go to verdict. And when you get to that point, you can then talk about setting aside trust funds for mitigation, redirection of a company, R&D in a new direction, training of displaced employees, mass education of shareholders, employees, or customers, or the public at large. There's all kinds of things you can negotiate, but if that doesn't work, you go to trial. You're going to file one of these cases, you better be prepared to go to verdict, or don't bother to file it. The other key aspect is that you better come with enough gun. These cases are long, tough, and expensive and time-consuming. A minimum budget ahead of time of $5 to $10 million if you're going to take on a major corporation in this arena. I think pretty much in conclusion, given the time restraints, which I am trying to respect, because I know it creates a lot of problems for Chip to manage all of us. It's like herding cats, you know? I'm guardedly optimistic where we stand in terms of the whole climate catastrophe, but the outcome is far from certain. I think it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. We're going to see more suffering, starvation, thirst, disease, war, migration, social instability, and of course the ever-present human condition of greed and lust for power and fear. But I'm still guardedly optimistic. I think RICO, if deployed in these areas, will help speed the transition and limit these ills. And I think I'll stop right there. I think I'm 12 seconds over. I apologize, Chip.